Let's get going. I'll just give a quick overview of our three speakers, and I will throw to John Thwaites. So firstly, to a little bio of John. He needs little introduction, but a professor of practice in the sustainability Monash Business School, founding chair of the Climate Work Centre and the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, Deputy Premier of Victoria for 8 years, and as many would know, recently the chair of the Circular Economy Ministerial Advisory Group for the Australian Government, and has penned a foreword for the report that is the subject of today's discussion, and a key supporter of Helen in doing this work. He will be followed by Joachim Quoden, the MD of the Extended Product Responsibility Alliance in Brussels and Cologne, who put the report in a broader context. Joachim has been a very generous source of information and support for Helen, and opening up his global network during her time in the EU last year. Helen is the CEO of One Planet Consulting, the Australian lead for climate action for associations, is on the boards of Solving Plastic Waste CRC, and also supporting the Soft Plastic Stewardship Australia group, and has worked with New South Wales Government and the Victorian Government as well. And I've known her for some 20 years now. I'm very pleased to be supporting her today. With that introduction, John, I will throw to you, and I should have had that screen up already. Let me quickly acknowledge the contributors and supporters of and reviewers of the report, of which Helen has laboured over many long nights, and is the kind of foundation for this webinar. John, to you. I'll stop sharing. I'll let you talk to the screen.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. And I'd like to start by congratulating Helen on producing this report, which I think is very timely. My role is to just set the Australian context and why extended producer responsibility is so critical in Australia. How it's not just a matter of waste and recycling, but it's important for our productivity, for supply chain resilience, for reaching our net zero targets. And I think the central point is very simple, and that is that Australia can't achieve a circular economy while producers can largely sell products and then leave responsibility for what happens to those products to consumers, to local councils, and to taxpayers. So just to step back and look at Australia's record in producer responsibility, we have had some important product stewardship schemes, including oil and TVs and computers, batteries, tyres, paint, mattresses and clothing. But the majority of those schemes in Australia have been voluntary schemes rather than based on mandatory producer responsibility. And the last regulated scheme that we have had in Australia was in 2011, which is the National Television and Computer Recycling Scheme. So that's 15 years ago. Voluntary schemes have done some really important pioneering work, but they have an inherent weakness. Responsible parties don't have to pay, and that means there are free riders. Helen's research shows that only 45% of liable companies participate and pay the levies, while others are free riding, and that compares to international experience of mandatory schemes where there's an 85 to 100% compliance. This leaves councils and taxpayers and some businesses to carry the can and pay for the costs. And that's what producer responsibility is meant to address. There has been a lot of research and work done over the years, and I was very pleased to be involved in the Circular Economy Ministerial Advisory Group to the Australian Government and Minister Tanya Plibersek. And we reported at the end of 2024 in our report, The Circular Advantage, and this issue was absolutely a key part of our report, because we found that essentially the circular economy would not be achieved unless we addressed producer responsibility. For too long, many in the public had seen the circular economy as a matter of waste management or recycling, but actually a circular economy starts much, much earlier. It starts right at the design stage. It starts as materials are used and how durable they are, how repairable they are, and critically, whether producers remain responsible for them throughout their lifetime. And so we made recommendations to the government for greater mandatory participation, better governance and reporting, and mandatory product stewardship or extended producer responsibility for priority materials and products. Now, following our report, the Australian government announced the Australian Circular Economy Framework, which is a great initiative and sets a clear national mission to double Australia's circularity by 2035. And the CSIRO pointed out the benefits for that, for the economy in terms of GDP, for the environment in terms of greenhouse emissions, and for reducing waste. But the reality is that we're not going to achieve the framework. We're not going to have any chance to double circularity without much better extended producer responsibility. More recently, the Productivity Commission has reported on the circular economy. And I think what is particularly significant about this report is that the Commission, the Productivity Commission, which is normally very cautious about new regulation, actually found that there is a clear role for product stewardship where markets and voluntary arrangements are not delivering. And it recommended that the Australian government urgently establish a national product stewardship scheme for small-scale solar PV. And it also recommended consideration for electric vehicle batteries, for small electronics as well. And it, I think, took the producer responsibility debate further and gave the imprimatur of the Productivity Commission to that. Now, I think it's also important that the Productivity Commission was reporting at a time where there was a national debate on productivity, because product stewardship, extended producer responsibility, shouldn't just be seen as a way to reduce waste or improve recycling. It should be seen as a critical component in the productivity debate. That is, we are going to get much better outcomes in terms of resource productivity through extended producer responsibility. We're also in a global context where there's more and more focus on supply chain security. And once again, extended producer responsibility can strengthen supply chain security, whether it's batteries, electronics, clean energy technologies. All of them contain valuable and critical materials, and recovering from them can reduce reliance on what are volatile global supply chains. A third major debate in Australia is around sovereign manufacturing, and certainly the government has a key policy of future made in Australia. And once again, extended producer responsibility can be an important part of a future made in Australia. And finally, it's very important that we acknowledge the real contribution that this can make to achieving Australia's net zero targets, not just net zero by 2050, but the ambitious targets along the way for 2035 as well. Now, probably the biggest barrier in some minds around the circular economy and extended producer responsibility is to ensure that it's not increasing the cost of living. And the cost of living is certainly a major factor for Australians today. But Helen's report shows that the direct price impact of a well-designed extended producer responsibility regime is very small relative to the value and the life of the product. And the fundamental point is these costs already exist. If producers don't pay, consumers, councils and taxpayers are paying. And so it is hitting the cost of living as we live today. So in conclusion, we've set the ambition in Australia to double our circularity by 2035. What we need now are practical mechanisms to achieve that. And Helen's paper, I think, gives us a very good way forward to do just that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. Excellent overview of the local scene. Let me jump now to Joachim. I will just share my screen again. And here we are. Indeed, John, just building on that, the Productivity Commission indeed did opine on this and warned about the risk of fragmentation if the state-based efforts weren't reined in by a federal approach or supported by a more coordinated approach across states and territories. I will now invite Joachim to give us a global overview, and I will jump forward to your next screen. Let me know when to go forward again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. Good morning from Europe. I'm happy to see so many interested people in EPR, in my topic somehow, because I have the pleasure to work in EPR since 34 years now, so since my whole life, more or less. And for the last 13 years, I'm heading EXPRA, the Extended Producer Responsibility Alliance, which is a club of non-profit industry-owned producer responsibility organizations. And as you can see, it is, of course, still a lot of members from the European Union and from Europe, but we are very happy that we are seeing more and more members and partners from other continents popping up. Of course, Canada, I would say, because the Canadians are more or less on the same level of development as the Europeans, but we are very, very happy to have partners in Australia and New Zealand as well. And the sense of EXPRA is, on one side, of course, the classical representation of my members towards the institution, European Commission, OECD, UNEP and so on, but on the other side also to work together, to learn from each other, to look for common projects, to discuss how we can harmonize our systems. Just definitions. If we all agree on the same definitions, that is easing the life of industry as well, because many companies do work throughout the world and not only in one country. So I think that's why it is so important to work together, to learn from each other. And so we were very happy to see this big interest from Australia, what has been done in the past. So Helen came over, we had contacts to many other people from Australia. They try to learn, they try to understand what are your options, because you are in the perfect situation at the moment. You can learn from countries that are doing this adventure for 30 years. So I really hope you pick the best out of it, adapt it to Australia, because this is somehow, we can go to the next slide, this is somehow the big advantage of extended producer responsibility. It is not a business plan. So I cannot send you 300 pages and then you know exactly what you have to do. You can adapt the principles to your local situation, to your needs. And that's why I think it is so successful, because it is so flexible and dynamic. And in the beginning, as John said, it was mainly an environmental tool. But now we are more and more going to the original definition to have an economic tool to solve an environmental problem. And if you see in the European Union, it is not only of interest in the meantime for the environmental ministry within the European Commission. Now the industry ministry is stepping in as well, because it delivers much more than only an environmental benefit. It keeps the materials in your country. John said this as well. And in Europe, we learned since Russia attacked Ukraine how important it is to be more resilient. We were too lazy over the last decades. So now it is a new dimension, a new move in Europe to strengthen our EPR system. And I think that's the right point in time for you to learn to take the best and to establish, hopefully, a wonderful EPR system as well. It is about the individual responsibility of a company to take care of their products, of their packaging throughout the life cycle. And of course, it does not make sense that each company tries to solve the problem of its own. So you are joining into a collective entity, and this entity is taking care of the obligations, of your responsibility. And responsibility, I think this is the difference to a taxation system. Responsibility means you stay responsible, you stay involved. As an obligation, you get your tax certificate, you sign it, and then you will never think of the problem again. And that is, I think, the big advantage of EPR. We keep the companies involved. They understand much more what is happening to their packaging after they sold it to the consumer. And this again is now much more important with in Europe we have a recycling crisis because the virgin oil was too low. Asian recyclers are too cheap versus European recyclers. So companies stay informed, stay involved, and understood what they have to do to keep our recycling in Europe alive. Next slide. Costs. We heard it already this morning or this afternoon as well. Costs, of course, are very important. We don't have money to burn, so we have to use the available money in the best sense. And Australia is a member of the OECD since, I think, more than 50 years. The OECD started very, very early to be interested in EPR. I think since 96, 97, there was the first OECD project. So you can learn a lot from their work as well. They published some books, some articles, and so on. And very interestingly, where are the costs arising of a system? And so you can see that collection and sorting and the recycling, the marketing of the material are causing most of the costs. And then, of course, it makes sense to concentrate in your work with these operators by looking for the most efficient operator, the cheapest operator. So competition in the operations is very important in the design of such a system. If you look to the PRO markets, you can see that the OECD found out that the cost effect is relatively low. And in these 5 to 10%, you have still costs like communication, education, research and development. So costs which are incurring, whether you have one PRO or, like in Romania, 40 PROs, if this makes any sense. I don't know. So that's something as a legislator you should carefully evaluate what is the best for you. Do you want to deal with one strong partner, or do you want to deal with 5, 10, 20 not so strong partners, and so on? So this is a topic for a whole 2-day workshop, I would say. But just have in mind the findings of the OECD are most of the costs are, of course, operations. And here you can bring a lot of cost savings if you organize them in the right way by calling for tender and so on. And as John also rightly said, the costs of EPR are not coming out of the blue. The costs are already there. Up to now, the municipalities usually have to take care of managing the packaging, bringing them to landfill, bringing them to incineration, and so on. So we are only making the costs usually more transparent, and suddenly you understand, oh my God, this is costing that. But if you make something transparent, it is much easier to improve the cost coverage than before. Next one, the final one, I think. We believe in an industry-owned PRO. We believe that those who pay the bill have to sit in the boards, have to be the owner, because they can steer their PRO in a much better way. They can take long-term decisions. My Belgian member, for example, they saw that their sorting plants and recycling plants were totally out of date. So they took a decision that for the next 5 years, we have to concentrate on sorting. They called for tender for 5 new sorting centers. They found partners from the waste management companies. And within 3 years, they were able to generate investments of nearly €1 billion for sorting and recycling. And so they have now a state-of-the-art infrastructure. If you have several PROs, of course, each one is waiting for the other to do the investment. So that's one of the problems in Germany at the moment. So you see, you have many things to learn, many things to understand. So you can, I think, really take the best for Australia, for Australian inhabitants, for Australian companies, so that you will have a system that keeps the material inside Australia and benefits to your CO2 goals as well. So overall, use this opportunity, use this report of Helen, use her knowledge that she gained. And you can imagine, I've never met a person who asked me so many questions. So I think she knows everything now. So I'm very, very happy to have such counterparts on the other side of the world from our point of view. Back to John. Thanks a lot. To Richard. Sorry.
Many thanks, Joachim. And yes, that is our Helen. Okay, that was a great tour de force. I am going to stop sharing, Helen, and pass to you for sharing and to take us away a deep dive.
Okay, tell me, can you see this all right, folks?
Yes, indeed.
Great. Okay, so yes, years of working in and around this space and concerned to see progress in Australia. Delighted to have the support, and thank you very much for your kind words, John and Joachim. There are wonderful people that have contributed to this project, some of whom are on the line, and I especially want to call out Emma Surat, my support person in Portugal. So these are key findings out of the report. I do encourage people to read it. It is a deep dive into producer responsibility and Australia's current system and what we can improve on and learn from overseas. Australia has tried every tool in the book for EPR, but as Joachim has said, it is a proven productivity and economic reform tool around the world. There are about 80 nations around the world that have mandated producer responsibility. Australia has a patchwork approach. We won't be able to unlock significant improvement to our economic opportunities in the future without resorting to EPR. EPR is used elsewhere, and so we should too. The fragmentation in our nation and our approach on EPR is imposing a major cost on Australians and our economy. I have no doubt about that, having looked at some of the extraordinary schemes overseas, and I'll give you some examples about that. Thanks, Tracy. Businesses and households are actually disadvantaged with the indecision on the costs. The extraordinary spinning wheels that we have in this country as a result of this is really quite distressing to see. Industry really could benefit from far greater decision and clarity about where we're going. It became extremely clear to me that no other country in the world resorts to voluntary EPR. voluntary schemes do not deliver at scale and cannot grow. And it's a fool's paradise to think that they can. They work sometimes, as I've indicated in the report, when there are very few liable or obliged producers, such as with paintback, but in vast majority of instances, mandatory is required. Our system has stagnated since the NTCRS was introduced in 2011. We need to work with government together and industry together for support and transparency in order to resolve this current situation. What was quite astonishing was that we have tried every permutation and combination of EPR under the sun, but we lack a clear framework. Most countries around the world have mandated producer responsibility, and they have mandated for not-for-profit PROs. They work in concert with industry to establish one, and not-for-profit delivers the best results. We actually have 10 regulators for EPR related schemes, that being 8 for container deposit schemes and 2 at the federal level, when in most countries one single national regulator is sufficient and of course very efficient. And we lack a central national regulatory system to gather data and simplify compliance. So let's do a deep dive, and I'll be as quick as I can, mindful of time for us to have plenty of time for questions. EPR has been around a long time, since the 1970s. The first scheme that I could ascertain was for Italy with batteries and accumulators in 1988, and all of these are outlined in the report. This is what they typically are for electronics, packaging, tyres, and other kinds of products, and of course, vehicles as well. In Italy, this particular program expanded to all battery formats over decades, and since around 2020, it has included vehicle EV batteries as well. As you can see from this graph, there was a considerable growth. There are now, in 2015, they were around more than 350 different schemes around the world. I reckon that's probably double that now. I'll outline further about Brazil and the mandatory scheme they put in place in 2010. Can you imagine how wonderful it would have been if we had the same here in Australia? South Africa has it, and as Joachim showed, even there are countries through Central America that have packaging mandatory EPR. So, well, there are 80 or more countries with EPR. It's been 15 years since Australia had a scheme, and it is definitely impeding our productivity growth. These are the schemes that are in place, and there's information about those in the report. And we have a plethora of voluntary schemes that were established in 2020 with no regulation pending. There's also in the report some information about cost-benefit analysis which have been done. However, getting information on those was very difficult because, as you could see from this, a lot of them were established before digital records were established. So countries have continued to evolve and establish new schemes, and often it's very hard to find background on that, but we managed to. So this basically reinforces the problem that we have in Australia. I was very impressed and have given quite a bit of information in the report about the Belgian scheme, where there is a federal model for intergovernmental EPR coordination, which I thought was a good example for us here. Likewise, a federation, just like Belgium, for intergovernmental EPR coordination. So those are the problems. There is a chapter based on my years working in government. It was necessary to set out a chapter about the problem statement, and that's that particular chapter. It was really gratifying to find others have concerns on this space as well. The Australian Retail Council conducted a report, research earlier this year and published their report on the fragmentation tax. Their key item that they identified was on container deposit schemes and the shipment of goods and materials across borders. It horrified me when I realised that we have 8 container deposit schemes and it took us 48 years to have national schemes coverage, and they're not consistent either. We cannot possibly apply this model to go forward on batteries, solar PV, or other products of concern. It might take us thousands of years, and we don't have that kind of time. These were the kinds of costs that were identified by the Australian Retail Council, and I've included them in the report. Here are the kinds of costs or value of the materials that we are losing. Again, there's more information about that in the report, which you can read at your leisure. I haven't gone into great detail about particular schemes because my focus really was to get us to first base. And that is that in Australia, we need three parts for good EPR. Firstly, we need good regulations, which are stipulated and formulated by governments in conjunction with the national regulator. We need a national regulator, and we need good PROs. Without a good regulator, we will not get good PROs. And at the moment, we don't have good PROs because we don't have those three fundamental building blocks. Once you have those, the deliverables, the money, and the money material coordination is sweet. That's where we fall down. A not-for-profit PRO in the middle acts on behalf of the producers who pay their money, and that money is then distributed and allocated according to the targets and requirements which are set by governments. And it's a negotiation process as to what is done for what value and best return to the national economy. It is a process and a dance, it's a collaboration, and it works extremely well together. The national regulator is the one who interprets and works with the PRO very closely and saying we need more of this or less of that. What is that? How is that feasible? So the funds come through here, they're held in trust by the not-for-profit PRO because it's not vertically integrated and it doesn't have roles and responsibilities in these. All funds are held for that purpose. Funds are then distributed for either for pickup at retail, for consumer education, to local councils if required, for collections, then paid to collectors, to sorters and to reprocessors. And as a consequence, material flows really well through. The PRO provides, in some instances, eco-modulated fees, which tell producers this is more valuable than that, and they price it accordingly. So in this circular system, materials flowed and are measured. The system is coordinated with agreements, records, and payments. It is equitable, it is responsive to the distribution of costs and responsibilities amongst producers, consumers, governments, and supply chain entities. The reports from the PROs come from the contracted parties to the central facility, and this is shared with the regulator to ensure that all parties are compliant. The regulator has a role and a responsibility for fining or penalising the PRO for non-compliance, and or also the producers or any parts. They see the contracts, they understand the system. So consequently, what you have is a highly productive, low wastes, and an economically viable system. It's quite beautiful to see. It's like a coordinated orchestra where all parties have their own interests and roles and responsibilities are clearly defined. So what I discovered in my research was the extraordinary number of countries that have not-for-profit regulated schemes. So I'll just pick two products, packaging and clothing, randomly looked at countries to see what they had, and the vast majority, as you can see, opt for not-for-profit schemes versus for-profit regulated schemes. This is the kind of lineup that we see, and likewise with clothing. So roughly about 87% of all the schemes or the countries that I looked at prefer to have not-for-profit schemes, and very few have for-profit schemes. Australia, we've dabbled in both, and with our NTCRS, we have multiple schemes, some for profit, some not for profit. So consequently, information is not shared, education, combined education is not undertaken, shared resourcing, logistics and so on does not occur. And if we remember back to Joachim's diagram, when you have competing schemes, or back to this one, if you have competing schemes, the funds are not well coordinated. They don't have the same power or capacity to invest in the system when you have multiple PROs and they're not working in concert with one another, with the government. So that was quite surprising to find that. What else? Also, Australia is truly an outlier in having voluntary schemes. Voluntary schemes work initially in order to identify what may be the best model initially. Industry establishes the scheme under a constitution with a board and develops the scheme with the various collections and responsibilities associated with that. Here in Australia, only 3 to 45% of liable companies pay levies, whereas overseas, it's 85 to 100%. So you can imagine the vast difference in funds that therefore, and the confidence that is imbued into the industry sectors. Leading brands carry disproportionate risk, PROs are underfunded and unable to scale, high risk of scheme failures, and say, for example, plastics recycling facilities, as ACORD researched earlier this year, run at around, I think it's actually 53% capacity, and they'll drop to an unviable 32% by 2030 unless EPR is introduced. Just last week, one of the mattress recyclers closed. A few weeks ago, it was a battery one. We're on a hiding to nothing unless we take some action. Whereas overseas, millions are invested annually in improvements. They are able to push forward on circular design, repair and recycling at scale. It's well coordinated, and they've recycled content driving manufacturing growth. It's a beautiful system. Just prior to finishing the report, this wonderful report landed from European. Anyway, I'll leave you to read on to that. But what this verified, I guess, my research, and I found it quite revealing that it was so clearly produced. It was looking at household packaging. Nevertheless, this accords with my own research as well. Basically, if you go for more PROs, you have far lower recycling range results. No matter the regulator, it is hard to keep an eye over multiple competing PROs. State monopoly delivers the lowest, but the lowest by far is in the range of the multiple PROs. So really the best thing we can do is to have single non-competing PROs driving the market forward. Reasons why: transparency, accountability, and public benefit. Indeed, while I was overseas, I was astonished to hear that 4 countries, being UK, Slovenia, Poland, and Germany, amended their laws in 2023-25 to move from multiple competing for-profit PROs to not-for-profit models after costly litigation and fraud cases. And you can read and see some pretty dramatic stories about court cases, fraud, all kinds of nefarious dealings that were discovered in some of those countries overseas. Okay, a quick couple of case studies. So I put in a couple of case cost-benefit analysis or regulatory impact statements, as a few that we could find. This is to show you that, yes, there are some costs, but these are costs that are shifting from rates for those households and those businesses. But it's also quite extreme because packaging in California is even worse than in Australia. The plastic recycling rate in California was only 6%. They have proposed a massive jump to 65% in 6-7 years. I believe that's impossible, but they intend to proceed with EPR to drive this. What are the sorts of benefits? They've identified that there will be 132,000 new jobs in that state alone, growth in reuse and refill systems, domestic recycling markets established. As you can imagine, with 6% at the moment, it's pretty much close to nil. Infrastructure, 30 new recycling facilities in that space of time, major expansion of collection, sorting and processing, a massive injection into the local economy, and substantial environmental benefits as well. You can read similar kinds of case studies in the report. In Belgium, how am I going for time? In Belgium, extraordinary high recycling rates. In comparison to Australia, we have no hope of getting where we want to without that EPR. They have a national PRO coordinator. They have a national regulator. I've written the links about that. They have healthy local manufacturing. No need for government grants, household rates, paying for recycling collection. They have national education programs, litter cleanup, etc. British Columbia, this is a tyre stewardship scheme. Comparing this with the Australian version, they have 100% of tyre producers funding it, 100% of tyres collection rates, and 86% recycled through mechanical recycling in their province. They invest $30 million a year in jobs, reuse, and manufacturing in that province alone. Whereas Australia isn't responsible for collection, that is left to the private sector, which does what's best as it can. We have a divided sector in this country, and the PRO budget is only $7.4 million, which is not available to go for collection. I'll leave that one there. Comparing mechanical and recycling rates, I'll just fly through these, but you can see on every measure, Australian PROs languish in comparison to the overseas equivalents. The PRO staffing levels, there's nil that can be achieved when you have virtually a fraction of a person per million people. I think the flooring scheme has got a total of 2.5 staff. There is no way they can grow from that. Likewise, clothing in Australia or batteries struggling as well, whereas you can see how well secured are the jobs and the PROs in other countries overseas that operate for public benefit. And really, what can you do when you've got little to no money? This is just, it is blown out by the vast budget for household packaging in Belgium, which has been that massive influx of investment into their infrastructure. But nevertheless, when the PROs in Australia barely register a blip, you can see that we have no hope of getting anywhere otherwise. So, in conclusion, and look, the report is full of extraordinary examples of overseas, and I'd like to acknowledge Helen and Emma's support in generating these. I thought I'd end on these two. Brazil, they had introduced their packaging law in 2010. They updated it in 2025 in order to strengthen for reuse and recycling targets. They have prioritized agricultural and industrial packaging recovery in order to secure their food future. This drives economic growth, rural jobs, and better environmental outcome, and especially because they want to establish competitive advantage of local manufacturing against imports. It is a resilience, supply chain resilience and productivity measure. In France, it's also based around social equity and again having dynamic sectors. And across their schemes for packaging, electronics and clothing, they have 20 different schemes in France. They have, for example, in these three, they've eco-modulated the levies to reward the products from producers that have great design. This, of course, leads to greater efficiency, longer life products, rewards easy disassembly, repairability, spare parts availability, and recycled content. How amazing would that be? It's very well suited to French consumers and businesses alike. It supports low-income households and SMEs as well. So we have the meeting of environment ministers in mid-September. This is a wonderful opportunity for our governments to set out their timeframe for regulatory reform. It's the moment to give certainty to industry sectors who are still awaiting action. I'll leave it for you to read through the recommendations in the report. They're up front in the exec summary, but they basically are recognise EPR as an essential productivity mechanism, adopt EXPRA's golden rules as baseline for effective EPR design and governance, prioritise ready, capable, not for PROs. Let's get going, let's move, we can do it now. Fast track bridging loan finance because it will take a while before regulations come into effect, and ensure that there is a transition period for action to take place. In the chapter on strengthening PROs, I go into detail about clarifying that the PROs are to coordinate the schemes for public benefit and the not-for-profit status, and that they are to expand services over time. recognise this as the preferred model, just like international experience, require eco-modulated producer fees, set a deadline for competing schemes in those areas where we have a plethora of them to present a unification plan, and appoint a transition broker if needed. Establish measurable performance targets and require independent periodic reviews. And in the chapter on regulation, I call for designating the national EPA as the regulator for all EPRs and PRO schemes, delegated by state and national functions. Grant the national EPA clear powers, apply penalties as required. Establish a national producer registry, perhaps that might be managed by the national EPA for compliance monitoring and enforcement and ensuring compliance. And establish a national confidential oversight between the national EPA and the PROs and the liable parties. So that's it. Thank you so much, and I look forward to questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Helen. It's a great run through of a very detailed report in a concise time frame. So thanks for taking us through it. We do have some questions in the chat, which I will pose to our speakers. I've got a few myself, but very keen to get some more as well. So we have a question. When you say a single non-competing pro, Helen, maybe you can start with this one. Is that a single one per product or one pro covering multiple products?
That's a very good question. I would advocate in the initial stage that it is single per product, because what we want is to get off to a flying start. The more complicated we make the schemes initially, the more difficult it will be to establish. There'll be more stakeholders to engage with. So that would be my recommendation. It's always possible to merge not-for-profit PROs over time. That happens in other jurisdictions, and PROs always evolve and change. So the French scheme, for example, for clothing started just initially with clothing and expanded to include linen and footwear. Likewise, the one on furniture expanded to other products as well. The Italian battery system started on certain formats of batteries, and it has expanded over time. So that's my recommendation.
Jakob, you have responded in the chat and would agree with that perspective?
You're on mute.
Yes, fully agree. Thank you.
Right. Maybe one for you then, Jakob. We have a question in the chat. Where are we? It's just gone up. Very few governments have elected to be the operator of pros. Are there any insights as to why and whether this is likely to change?
Yeah. EPR was invented as something different to taxes. Taxes is where the government collects the money and then decides how to spend it, usually spending the money by authorities. The idea of EPR is to involve industry and to use the expertise of industry in running the system. If you look now which countries have used, they call it state-run PRO. You come to Hungary, and as far as I know, they are now probably changing it very soon as well, and Croatia. And if you look to the governmental background, you will see that these countries do not trust industry at all, and that they prefer their own mates, to be very diplomatically and not to run into a problem, that they prefer their own mates and not independent entities to take care of the money. And if you then see the results, it is the proof that the money is, we call it sticky fingers. I don't know whether you understand this in Australia. So the money is not used for the purpose, but ending up in the pockets of some people. So that's why the examples of state-run PROs are not really convincing. And luckily, most of the governments prefer to be the referee and the setter of the rules and to punish industry in case, instead of being in the spotlight themselves.
Thanks very much, Jakob. John, one for you in the chat. How can we build more political will at a federal and state level to, one, prioritise EPR legislation, and two, work towards harmonisation? You're on mute there, John.
I'll deal with the second question first, which is harmonisation. This is certainly something that the Circular Economy Ministerial Advisory Group prioritised, because we heard so many stories from industry about the cost of fragmentation. And it's a financial cost, but it's also a cost to stepping forward with productive activities in recycling, reusing, etc. So we made a strong recommendation that there should be a national approach. That doesn't mean in every case it has to be national regulation, and it doesn't remove the states altogether. What it means is that it has to be coordinated, and we suggested the model more like the Australian Building Codes Board for building regulation. So you have one set of national standards. There may be some variations at a state level, but essentially you've got a national standard and a national regulator. So that's the harmonisation point. The political will point is obviously, the $64,000 question. As I said, I think one of the biggest challenges at the moment is we are in a cost of living time where cost of living is a very high political issue, and there's a fear that these sort of schemes will increase the costs for consumers. Helen points out that the increase in cost is either very, very small or not there at all, and it replaces a cost that consumers are bearing in other ways. But we have to make that case. So I think having more evidence like Helen does, but having others be able to show that the costs are minimised. And it takes quite a while. Joachim was having a bit of a laugh before we met, saying that the Anglo-Saxons like to have a lot of consultation about these things before they do anything. I think learning from overseas that this is something that people want and it works is a pathway to political change. And that's why I'm strongly supporting Helen's work and want to get it out there that this is not going to be harmful for consumers, it's going to benefit them.
Thanks, John. Great answer.
If I can just quickly jump in on that one, Richard. In all my conversations that I've been having with state and federal governments, I discern a mood for change and a mood for action on this, which is why the forthcoming meeting of Environment Ministers is so important. I've had numerous discussions and presentations on the report to state governments, and delighted that the number that have come online today as well. So I do discern that there is a mood for change, and I think the report is timely. There's a couple of questions I wanted to go to here. Anne-Marie Boland, hi Anne-Marie, has asked, is there any indication the National EPA is interested in tackling EPR? I know that the NTCRS team have moved across to the new EPA, and I have been in touch with the team at the National EPA, so I believe that that is in train, but no announcement has been made on that front yet. Yep.
The meeting coming up will look at intergovernmental agreement between EPAs and states. Helen, do you have any sense of whether that might facilitate a framework for EPR harmonisation?
I hope that the M coming up contains more than just that. I hope that it does include that. And I've been talking about the Belgian scheme and how that works for a year now, and introduced a number of state governments to how that works, and I ran a presentation on that featuring Mark Adams. I think it was about February this year. So if people want to hear Mark Adams from Belgium, the regulator, talk about how their system works, they can find a link off my website for that purpose. It's an excellent presentation. But I do hope that they also make some announcements about intent to regulate and a time frame when regulations will come into effect and which schemes they'll be focused or products they'll be focusing on.
Joachim, we have about a minute to deadline. How is the cost question that John has raised, cost of living, seen overseas, and what's the actual then lived experience?
Yeah, of course, the costs are always very important, and you have to take into account that the costs are mainly directly connected to targets and deadlines. So if you see, for example, the cost or the investment that is available in Belgium, this is the situation after more than 30 years. So usually you start on a lower scale, so lower costs, and then you increase and extend the system over time. So you will not be faced from day one with the costs that you see in some European countries now. So I think this is a good topic for discussion between the governments and industry as well. How quickly would you like to develop the system with probably which costs? Moreover, usually you are not able to pass all the costs for EPR on the final product price, because it is internalization of external costs. So if you see an increase in the energy prices, will the producers and retailers pass 100% of the increase to the consumer? Probably not. So it is eaten partly by the value chain as well, and not fully by the consumer. So that is an important factor as well, which increases the pressure internally to optimize the system. So this is somehow a positive effect as well. So I've not heard in any country an proven increase of the inflation rate because of EPR.
That's a great message to take away.
Yeah.
I think we'll draw a line there.
May I add one important topic, because you always discuss mandatory versus voluntary, and the Australians, as far as I understand, you are tending more to the voluntary approach. Have in mind, minimum in Europe, but I think all over the world, the amount of local companies is shrinking. The good guys are shrinking. We are seeing that more and more products, packaging are coming from outside Europe or outside the countries, online sales. So do you think that in Germany we have 1 million Chinese companies registered in online sales? Do you think 1 million Chinese companies are interested in the welfare of Australian inhabitants? So if you don't make it mandatory, you will even put the local companies more under pressure. They will be the idiots to pay because they think of their country. So that is for me. It's my personal topic at the moment in Europe. We have to make the online sales responsible. We have to make the platforms responsible. Otherwise, we are facing very, very big problems. Sorry for jumping in with this topic.
No, a key takeaway, and obviously front of mind over there, and we need to keep that in mind as well. Helen, we'll wrap it up here now. The report is on your website.
Yes, it is, Richard, and I had gone to in case we went back to look at some particular slides. Oh, what have I done? I've flicked right out of the PowerPoint, my apologies. So here are the details if people need to. Let me embiggen that. And thank you to everyone for coming along. It's been a great honour and a privilege to liaise with some wonderful people. John, Joachim, Richard, Emma, Amanda and others. Helen, there's been some, and Rod Carr, some great contributors keeping me on the straight and narrow. Thank you so much indeed.
Good evening. Thank you.